The scorching summer sun beat down on Randsburg, California, like God himself was pressing a burning iron against the earth. Gabriel Kincaid stumbled through the desert scrub, his body burning with fever as his horse plodded listlessly beside him. 3 days since the rattlesnake had struck, 3 days of riding with poison spreading through his veins, and now he could barely stay in the saddle. His vision swam, the horizon tilting at impossible angles as consciousness slipped from his grasp like water through parched fingers. Virginia Reynolds wiped sweat from her brow as she scanned the horizon from her small homestead just outside of Randsburg. It was purely by chance that she spotted the figure in the distance, a man collapsing from his horse, a dark shape against the golden landscape. Without a second thought, she grabbed her father's old Springfield rifle and ran toward the fallen stranger. "Mister, can you hear me?" Virginia called, approaching cautiously. The man was face down in the dirt, his breathing shallow and labored. His skin burned to the touch when she rolled him over. "Fever, bad fever." Gabriel's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, revealing striking blue irises clouded with delirium. "Snake," he managed to croak before unconsciousness claimed him again. Virginia was 24, strong from years of working the small ranch she'd inherited when her parents died of influenza 2 winters past. Still, dragging the tall cowboy's dead weight to her wagon nearly broke her back. His horse followed docilely behind as she drove the short distance back to her modest homestead. Getting him inside was another ordeal entirely. Virginia had to drag him inch by painful inch from the wagon to the porch, then through the door to her own bed. By the time she'd settled him, her arms trembled with exhaustion and her dress was soaked with sweat. As she cut away his pant leg, she found the evidence of his words: 2 puncture marks on his calf, the flesh around them swollen and angry red. The wound was festering. Virginia had seen snakebite before her father had survived one when she was 12, but this looked bad. Very bad. "You picked a poor place to get bit, cowboy," she muttered as she cleaned the wound with whiskey. The man didn't stir, which worried her more than if he'd screamed. His breathing was shallow, and his skin burned like a cook stove. Virginia soaked rags in cool water and placed them on his forehead, neck, and chest, hoping to bring the fever down. Night fell across the desert, bringing with it the relative mercy of cooler air. Virginia lit a lamp and examined her patient in the soft glow. He was handsome in a rugged way, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw and sun-streaked brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were trail-worn but of decent quality. A gun belt with a well-maintained Colt revolver hung over the back of her chair, along with a dusty hat that had seen better days. She searched his pockets, finding only a few dollars, a folded letter addressed to Gabriel Kincaid in feminine handwriting, and a small photograph of a kindly-looking older woman who bore a resemblance to her unconscious guest. "Well, Mr. Kincaid," Virginia said to the still form on her bed, "looks like you've got yourself into a heap of trouble." She spent the night in her rocking chair, waking every hour to change the cool cloths and trickle water between his cracked lips. Sometime before dawn, he began to thrash and mutter, caught in fever dreams. Virginia held him down as gently as she could, speaking soothing words until he calmed. When morning came, Gabriel's condition hadn't improved. If anything, he looked worse. Virginia knew she needed help, but the nearest doctor was in Bakersfield, a full day's ride away. She couldn't leave Gabriel alone in this condition, and she doubted he would survive the journey. She settled for riding quickly to town to fetch supplies. The local mercantile owner, Mr. Parsons, raised his eyebrows when she purchased herbs, bandages, and medicines. "Someone taken ill, Miss Reynolds," he asked as he wrapped her purchases. Found a traveler with snakebite, she replied tersely. Virginia had learned to keep conversation with townspeople brief. As a young, unmarried woman living alone, she was already the subject of too much gossip. Want me to send Doc Parker out when he comes through next week? Parsons offered. Virginia shook her head. Don't know if he'll last that long. I'll manage. She ignored the curious stares as she rode back to her homestead. Let them talk. It wouldn't be the first time. When she returned, Gabriel was awake, though his eyes were glassy with fever. He struggled to sit up when she entered the room. Who, where? His voice was a dry rasp. Easy there, Virginia said, putting down her parcels and moving to press him gently back onto the bed. You're safe. My name's Virginia Reynolds. Found you collapsed about a mile from my place yesterday. You've got a nasty snake bite and a worse fever. Gabriel stared at her, confused. How long? Just 1 day so far, she answered, pouring him water from a pitcher. Here, drink slow. He managed a few sips before falling back, exhausted. My horse, he's fine, in the corral with mine. Virginia soaked a fresh cloth and placed it on his forehead. You, on the other hand, need to rest and let me take care of that bite. Gabriel's eyes were already drifting closed. Thank you, madam, he mumbled before slipping back into unconsciousness. Virginia prepared a poultice of herbs according to her mother's old recipe book. The wound looked worse in the daylight, angry red streaks extending up his leg from the bite. She cleaned it again, applied the poultice, and wrapped it in clean bandages. For the next 2 days, the pattern continued. Gabriel drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to drink broth and water, other times lost in delirious ravings. Virginia slept in snatches, always alert for changes in his condition. On the evening of the 3rd day, as she was changing his bandages, Gabriel's eyes opened with unexpected clarity. You're still here, he said, his voice stronger than before. Virginia nodded. It's my house. Where else would I be? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, I mean, taking care of a stranger. It's kind. Anyone would do the same, she replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. How bad is it? He asked, nodding toward his leg. Virginia hesitated before answering honestly. Bad enough. The fever's been high. But I think the poison's starting to work its way out. Gabriel studied her face for a moment. You haven't slept. It wasn't a question, but Virginia shrugged. I've managed. You should rest. I'll be fine for a few hours. She gave him a skeptical look. Last time you thought you were fine, you fell off your horse in the middle of the desert. That earned a weak chuckle from Gabriel. Fair point, Miss Reynolds. Virginia, she corrected him. If you're going to be taking up my bed for days on end, you might as well use my given name. Virginia, he repeated, and something about the way he said it made her cheeks warm. I'm Gabriel Kincaid. I know, I found your letter. She nodded toward the small table where she'd placed his belongings. A shadow passed over his face. From my sister. I was on my way to see her in San Francisco. Well, Mr. Kincaid, that journey's going to have to wait until you can stand without falling over. He didn't argue, his brief moment of lucidity already fading as his eyelids grew heavy. Thank you, Virginia, he murmured as sleep claimed him again. That night, Gabriel's fever broke in a crisis that left him soaked in sweat and shivering. Virginia stayed by his side, changing the bedclothes and helping him sip water. By morning, his temperature was nearly normal, though he was weak as a newborn calf. You look better, Virginia observed as she brought him a bowl of porridge. Gabriel managed to push himself up against the headboard. Feel like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, but my head's clearer. That's progress, she said, handing him the bowl. When his hands trembled too much to hold the spoon steady, Virginia took it back without comment and began to feed him small spoonfuls. Gabriel's cheeks colored with embarrassment. "This isn't how I imagined meeting a beautiful woman." Virginia nearly dropped the spoon. It had been a long time since anyone had called her beautiful. Most folks in town thought her too tall, too lean, too independent to be properly attractive. "Fever must have affected your eyesight," she said lightly, focusing on the task at hand. Gabriel shook his head. "My vision's just fine." Virginia didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "That leg needs fresh air. I'm going to unwrap it after you eat." The wound looked remarkably better. The angry red streaks had receded, and while the bite marks were still inflamed, the worst of the infection seemed to have passed. "You're a skilled healer," Gabriel observed as she examined the wound. Virginia shrugged. "My mother taught me." "She was the one people called when they couldn't afford the doctor. She taught you well. I suspect I'd be dead without your care." "Likely," she agreed matter-of-factly, rewrapping his leg with clean bandages. "You were in a bad way when I found you." Gabriel caught her wrist gently when she finished. "Thank you, Virginia, I mean it. Not many would take in a stranger like this." His touch sent an unexpected warmth through her arm. Virginia pulled back, suddenly flustered. "Well, I could hardly leave you to die, could I?" "Some might have," he said quietly. They fell into a companionable routine over the next few days. Gabriel grew stronger, able to feed himself, and even stand for short periods with Virginia's assistance. She moved a cot into the main room of the small cabin for herself, giving him privacy in the bedroom. On the morning of the 6th day, Virginia entered the bedroom to find Gabriel sitting on the edge of the bed, attempting to put on his boots. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, hands on her hips. Gabriel looked up sheepish. "I thought I might try walking to the porch. I need to start moving around." "Not without help you aren't," Virginia said firmly. "That leg still needs time to heal." "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he argued. "It's not an imposition if I'm offering," she countered. "Besides, you try riding a horse in your condition, and you'll find yourself face down in the dirt again before you've gone a mile." Gabriel sighed, acknowledging the truth of her words. "At least let me help around the house." "I feel useless just lying here." Virginia considered for a moment. "Fine. You can shell these peas while I take care of the animals." She brought him a basket of fresh peas and set him up in her rocking chair on the porch, where he could enjoy the morning breeze. Gabriel seemed content with the task, and Virginia found herself stealing glances at him as she went about her chores. There was something about Gabriel Kincaid that intrigued her. He wasn't like the rough miners or cowhands that occasionally passed through Randsburg. There was a quiet thoughtfulness to him, and when he spoke of books or far-off places, his eyes lit up with intelligence and curiosity. "You're a rancher?" he asked that evening as they shared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the peas he'd shelled. Virginia nodded. "This was my parents' place. It's small, just 40 acres, but the water's reliable and the soil's decent for this part of California." "You work it alone?" Gabriel looked impressed. "Mostly. I hire help for branding and roundup." She paused, then added, "People think it's strange, a woman running a ranch by herself." "People have small imaginations," Gabriel replied. "My sister runs a successful millinery shop in San Francisco, most capable person I know." "Is that where you're headed, San Francisco?" Gabriel nodded, his expression growing somber. "Laura, my sister, her husband died last winter, left her with 2 young children to raise. I aim to help her for a while, at least until she gets back on her feet." "That's admirable," Virginia said softly. "It's family," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. "What about before? What were you doing?" Gabriel hesitated. "Bit of this, bit of that. Worked cattle drives up from Texas, did some scouting for the army. Most recently, I was a deputy marshal in Arizona Territory. A lawman, Virginia raised an eyebrow, for a time. Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Virginia didn't press. As darkness fell, Gabriel insisted on sleeping on the cot in the main room. "You should have your bed back," he said firmly. "I've kept you from it long enough." Virginia wanted to argue that he still needed rest, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. She helped him move to the cot, noticing how he leaned on her less than before. His strength was returning rapidly. The seventh day dawned clear and hot. Virginia woke to find Gabriel already up, a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. "You shouldn't be standing so long," she admonished, but couldn't help being pleased at his progress. "Needed to prove I'm not completely helpless," he replied with a lopsided smile that did strange things to her pulse. After breakfast, Virginia helped Gabriel to the porch, where he sat whittling a piece of wood while she worked in her small vegetable garden. It felt oddly domestic, and Virginia found herself imagining what it would be like to have someone to share her days with permanently. The thought both frightened and excited her. As the sun began to set on the seventh night since she'd found him, Gabriel joined Virginia on the porch. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the desert landscape transform in the golden light. "I should be able to travel in another day or two," Gabriel said eventually. Virginia felt an unexpected pang at his words. "Your leg still needs time," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "I've already taken too much of your time," he replied, "and Laura will be wondering what's become of me." "At least wait until you can walk without that limp," Virginia insisted. "Another few days won't make much difference." Gabriel studied her face for a moment. "Why did you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Do what? Take care of me. A stranger who could have been anyone dangerous even. You brought me into your home, tended my wounds, watched over me for days." Virginia considered the question. "When I found you, you were dying," she said simply. "I couldn't just leave you there. Many would have." "I'm not many," she said with a hint of defiance. Gabriel's expression softened. "No, you certainly are not." Something in his voice made Virginia look away, suddenly self-conscious. It was just the decent thing to do. "For 7 days and nights. That's more than decency, Virginia." She met his gaze then and found warmth and something else, admiration, perhaps in his blue eyes. "I'm not leaving you," she said softly, echoing words she'd whispered during his worst fever nights. "Not until you're truly well." Gabriel reached out slowly and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. "Thank you," he said, and in those two simple words, Virginia heard a depth of feeling that made her heart quicken. They sat in silence as darkness fell, hands still joined, neither willing to break the moment. The next morning brought a shift in their dynamic. Gabriel moved with greater confidence, his limp less pronounced. Virginia found him chopping vegetables for the midday meal when she returned from feeding the livestock. "You're getting handy around the kitchen," she observed, washing her hands at the basin. Gabriel gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Not really, but I can at least manage to cut things without hurting myself." "A useful skill for a former lawman," Virginia teased. "More useful than you might imagine," he replied with a smile. They worked side by side preparing the meal, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. Virginia became acutely aware of Gabriel's presence, the scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the low hum of his voice when he spoke. "Tell me about Randsburg," he said as they ate. "You don't seem overly fond of the town." Virginia poked at her food. "It's not the town itself, it's just, small places have long memories and narrow minds sometimes. Meaning," she sighed. "Meaning a woman living alone is subject to speculation. Some think it's not proper, others see it as an invitation." Gabriel's expression darkened. "Have you had trouble?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," she said firmly. "But it gets tiring, always being watched, always being judged." "Is that why you live so far from town?" Virginia nodded. "My father chose this spot because the water was good. I stay because the distance suits me. Don't you get lonely?" The question was gentle, without presumption. Virginia looked out the window at the vast landscape. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But better lonely than trapped in a marriage of convenience, which seems to be what most folks think I should want." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say that the right companionship enhances freedom rather than limiting it." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was," he said softly. "Died 5 years ago. My father followed a year later." "I'm sorry," Virginia said, understanding the grief that never fully faded. As evening approached, Gabriel suggested a short walk. "I need to build my strength," he insisted when Virginia looked doubtful. "Just to the corral and back." She agreed, staying close beside him as they walked slowly across the yard. Gabriel paused at the corral to greet his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding who nickered in recognition. "He's a good animal," Virginia observed. "Followed me docilely when I brought you back." "Samson's got better sense than his owner," Gabriel said, patting the horse's neck. "He knew you were helping." The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as they made their way back to the house. Gabriel's steps were steadier than before, though Virginia could tell he was tiring. "Tomorrow I'll check those stitches," she said as they reached the porch. "If they're healing clean, we can leave them out." Gabriel nodded, leaning against the porch rail to catch his breath. "Virginia," he began, then hesitated. "Yes." "I've been thinking about how to repay you for all you've done." Virginia shook her head. "I don't want payment." "Not money," he clarified quickly. "I know you wouldn't accept that, but there must be something I can do for you before I leave." The word leave hung between them, weighted with unspoken feelings. "Your company has been payment enough," Virginia said softly. "It's been nice having someone to talk to." Gabriel's eyes held hers for a long moment. "For me as well." That night, Virginia lay awake in her bed, listening to Gabriel's steady breathing from the main room. In just a few days, he would be gone, continuing on to San Francisco and his sister's family. The thought left an emptiness in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. She had known him for only a week, and much of that time he had been ill. It was foolish to feel this attachment. And yet, something about Gabriel Kincaid had slipped past her carefully constructed defenses. His quiet strength, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, these things had become precious to her in an alarmingly short time. Virginia turned onto her side, forcing herself to be practical. Gabriel had a life waiting for him elsewhere. He had family who needed him. Whatever connection had formed between them during his convalescence was probably nothing more than gratitude on his part. She would be wise to guard her heart. The next day passed too quickly. Gabriel's wound was healing well, and Virginia removed the stitches, pleased with how cleanly the bite marks were closing. His fever hadn't returned, and he was able to walk around the yard without assistance, though still with a noticeable limp. "You should be fit to travel in another day or two," Virginia said, her voice carefully neutral as she put away her medical supplies. Gabriel nodded, though his expression was difficult to read. "I've imposed on you long enough." "It hasn't been an imposition," she said quickly, then busied herself with straightening items that didn't need straightening. That evening, Gabriel insisted on cooking supper, a simple but delicious stew that filled the small cabin with savory aromas. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Virginia asked, surprised by his skill. "When you spend enough time on the trail, you either learn to cook or you eat poorly," he replied with a shrug. and I've always preferred eating well." After the meal, they sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional call of a nighthawk. "I'll miss this," Gabriel said quietly. Virginia glanced at him. "The sun sets." "This," he clarified, gesturing between them. "Sitting together at the end of the day, talking or not talking." Virginia's heart quickened. "It has been nice," she admitted. Gabriel turned to face her fully. "Virginia, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I want you to know that these days have meant a great deal to me, not just because you saved my life, but because of who you are." She felt a flush creep up her neck. "You'd have done the same for me." "That's just it," he continued earnestly. "You say that as if it's nothing extraordinary, but it is. Your kindness, your strength, your independence, they're remarkable." Virginia looked down at her hands, unused to such praise. "You make me sound like some kind of heroine from a dime novel." Gabriel's fingers gently tilted her chin up until their eyes met. "No, I'm describing the very real woman sitting beside me, the woman I've come to care for." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Virginia's pulse raced as Gabriel's hand moved to cup her cheek. "I know we've known each other only a short time," he said softly, "but I feel as if we've known each other much longer," she finished for him, barely above a whisper. Gabriel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't expect this. When I set out for San Francisco, I never imagined I'd find a snake," Virginia suggested with a nervous laugh. Gabriel smiled, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I never imagined I'd find you." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Virginia's eyes fluttered closed as his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that sent warmth cascading through her body. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, and Virginia found herself leaning into his touch, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. When they finally drew apart, Gabriel's eyes were filled with a tender light that made Virginia's breath catch. She had never been looked at that way before, as if she were something rare and wonderful. "I leave tomorrow," he said, regret heavy in his voice. "Laura needs me, and I gave her my word." Virginia nodded, understanding but unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Gabriel took her hands in his. "But I want you to know that what's happened between us, it's not something I take lightly. And if I could stay—" "You have obligations," Virginia said, finding her voice. "I understand that." "Virginia," Gabriel said urgently, "I'm coming back. If you'll have me, I'm coming back." She searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, but found only earnest determination in his blue eyes. "Your sister needs my help for a time," he acknowledged. "But once she's settled, once I've fulfilled my promise to her." He squeezed her hands gently. "Virginia, I've spent years wandering, never finding a place that felt right, until now." Hope bloomed in Virginia's chest, fragile but insistent. "You hardly know me," she protested weakly. "I know enough," Gabriel said with conviction. "I know you're brave and kind and stubborn in the best possible way. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know the sound of your laugh makes me want to hear it again and again." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "And I want to know more everything if you'll give me the chance." Virginia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I'd like that," she whispered. Gabriel pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Virginia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, letting herself believe in the possibility of a future that included Gabriel Kincaid. Morning brought with it a bittersweet mood. Gabriel packed his few belongings while Virginia prepared provisions for his journey. They moved around each other with a new awareness, their hands finding excuses to touch, their eyes meeting in silent communication. "It's about 3 days' ride to San Francisco if you take it easy," Virginia said, wrapping the last of the journey cakes in a cloth. "Promise me you won't push too hard. That leg needs time to fully heal." "I promise," Gabriel said, buckling his saddlebags. "I've had enough of being foolhardy to last me a lifetime." Virginia handed him the wrapped food and a canteen of fresh water. "Take care of yourself," she said, unable to keep a slight tremor from her voice. Gabriel set down the provisions and took her hands in his. "Virginia Reynolds, I meant every word I said last night. I'm coming back to you as soon as I can." She nodded, trying to smile through the tears that threatened. "I'll hold you to that, Gabriel Kincaid. I hope you will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving, a rose, intricately detailed despite the simple tools he'd had to work with. "I made this for you. It's not much, but it's beautiful," Virginia said softly, cradling the carving in her palm. "Something to remember me by until I return," Gabriel said. "As if I could forget you," she replied with a watery smile. Gabriel cupped her face in his hands and kissed her a kiss filled with promise and longing, and the certainty of return. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers for a moment before reluctantly pulling away. Virginia walked with him to where Samson waited patiently, already saddled and ready for the journey. Gabriel checked the cinch one last time, then turned to Virginia. "Write to me," she said suddenly. "Let me know you arrived safely." "I will," he promised. "And you'll write back," Virginia nodded. "Every week." Gabriel mounted with only a slight wince, settling himself in the saddle. He looked down at Virginia, memorizing her face in the morning light. "How long?" she asked, the question containing all their unspoken fears and hopes. 2 months, Gabriel said firmly. 3 at most. Just long enough to help Laura get established. Virginia nodded, accepting his timeline even as her heart rebelled against the separation. "I'll be here," she promised. Gabriel leaned down from the saddle for one last kiss. "I'm coming back to you," he whispered against her lips. And then he was riding away, turning in the saddle to look back at her until the desert landscape swallowed him from view. Virginia stood watching long after he had disappeared, the wooden rose clutched tightly in her hand. The days that followed Gabriel's departure were both easier and harder than Virginia had expected. Easier because she fell back into her familiar routines of caring for her small ranch. Harder because his absence felt like a physical thing, a hollow space where his voice and his laughter had been. True to his word, Gabriel's first letter arrived just over a week later, carried by the stagecoach that passed through Randsburg twice weekly. Virginia's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. "My dearest Virginia, I arrived safely in San Francisco, though the journey took longer than expected due to a washed-out road near Stockton. My leg pains me only a little now, thanks to your excellent care. Laura was overjoyed to see me, though concerned about my injury. I told her of you, how you found me and nursed me back to health. She insists on meeting the woman who saved her brother's life. Perhaps someday soon she will. San Francisco is as busy and chaotic as ever. After the peace of your homestead, the constant noise and bustle of the city is jarring. I find myself longing for the quiet evenings on your porch, watching the sun set over the desert. Laura's situation is somewhat better than I feared. Her husband's business partner has been helping her manage the finances, and the millinery shop is doing well. The children Timothy, age 8, and Eliza, age 6, are healthy and spirited. They keep asking when their Uncle Gabe will teach them to ride horses and shoot guns. I've promised the former but diplomatically avoided committing to the latter, much to Laura's relief. I think of you constantly. The memory of your smile sustains me through each day of separation. I count the weeks until I can return to you. Yours faithfully, Gabriel. Virginia read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in her mother's old jewelry box. She sat at her small table and penned a reply, telling Gabriel of the daily happenings at the ranch, of the new calf born to her best milk cow, of how the desert wildflowers had bloomed after an unexpected rainfall. She hesitated over how to close the letter, finally settling on waiting for your return and signing her name. It felt both too much and not enough, but it was honest. The weeks stretched into months. Gabriel's letters came regularly, each one treasured and read until the paper grew soft at the creases. He wrote of helping Laura establish herself in a small house near the millinery shop, of teaching his nephew to ride, of exploring options for his own future. I've been offered a position with Wells Fargo, he wrote in mid-September. They need experienced men for their security division. The pay is good and the work steady, but it would mean remaining in San Francisco. Virginia's heart had sunk at those words until she read the next paragraph. I declined. My future is not here, Virginia. It's with you, if you'll have me. I've saved nearly enough to buy a small spread of my own or perhaps to contribute to improving one that already exists. The implication was clear, and Virginia found herself smiling as she read the rest of the letter, which detailed his plans to leave San Francisco within the month. True to his word, Gabriel's final letter arrived in early October. My dearest Virginia, by the time you receive this, I will already be on my way to you. Laura is well settled now, with good people around her and the business thriving. The children are doing splendidly in school. They made me promise to bring them to visit Aunt Virginia someday, a presumption for which I hope you'll forgive them and me. I should arrive in Randsburg by the 15th, barring any unexpected delays. These past months have felt like years, but the thought of seeing you again has sustained me through every day of separation. Until then, I remain, eternally yours, Gabriel. Virginia read the date again, October 15th. Today. Her heart raced as she realized Gabriel might arrive at any moment. She looked around her small cabin with new eyes, suddenly concerned about its modest appearance. She had swept and dusted just that morning, but now she wished she had picked wildflowers or baked a special meal. She was still fretting when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Virginia froze for an instant, then hurried to the small mirror beside the door, checking her appearance. She had dressed in her everyday work clothes that morning, a simple blue skirt and white blouse. Her chestnut hair was braided and pinned up, practical for ranch work but hardly fashionable. For a moment, she considered changing, then shook her head at her own foolishness. Gabriel had seen her covered in dust and sweat. He hadn't seemed to mind. Virginia stepped onto the porch just as Gabriel rode into the yard. He looked different somehow, his hair trimmed neatly, his clothes newer and less trail-worn. But his smile when he saw her was exactly as she remembered, lighting up his face and crinkling the corners of his eyes. He dismounted in one fluid movement, showing no sign of his previous injury, and crossed the yard in long strides. Virginia found herself running to meet him, propriety forgotten in the joy of reunion. Gabriel caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of months of longing. When he set her down, his hands framed her face as if reassuring himself that she was real. "Virginia," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. And then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and all the lonely days and nights of separation melted away like morning frost in sunshine. His arms held her close against him, solid and real, and finally here. When they broke apart at last, both breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I missed you," he said simply. "Every day, every hour." "I missed you too," Virginia replied, her hands clutching the front of his coat as if afraid he might disappear. "So much." Gabriel smiled, his thumbs gently wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "No more separations," he promised. "If you'll have me, Virginia Reynolds, I aim to stay right by your side from now on." Virginia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Gabriel seemed to understand, drawing her close again, his cheek resting against her hair. They stood that way for a long moment, content just to hold and be held, until Virginia finally pulled back slightly. "You must be tired from your journey," she said, her practical nature reasserting itself. "Come inside, I'll make coffee." Gabriel laughed, the sound warm and rich. "Same Virginia," he said fondly, "taking care of everyone." Inside the cabin, Gabriel set down his saddlebags and looked around with appreciation. "It's exactly as I remembered," he said. "I used to dream about this place in San Francisco, the simplicity of it, the peace." Virginia busied herself with the coffee pot, suddenly shy under his gaze. "It's not much compared to a city like San Francisco." "It's perfect," Gabriel said firmly. He came up behind her, gently turning her to face him. "Virginia, I didn't come back for the place, I came back for you." The directness in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Gabriel, let me say this," he interrupted gently. "I've had months to think about what I want, about where I belong. And it's here with you, if you'll have me." Virginia studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only sincerity and hope. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Ranch life isn't easy, and people will talk, they already do, about me." Gabriel's expression hardened slightly. "Let them talk. What we have is between us, not them." "And what do we have exactly?" Virginia asked, needing to hear him say it. Gabriel took her hands in his. "Love," he said simply. "I love you, Virginia Reynolds. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you refused to leave me, even though I was a stranger. And every day since, through your letters, through the memory of our time together, that love has only grown stronger." Virginia felt tears prick at her eyes again. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both frightening and freeing to say aloud. "I was afraid to hope, no more fear," Gabriel said, pulling her close. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They spent the remainder of the day talking, sharing the details of their months apart that couldn't be conveyed in letters. Gabriel spoke of his sister's recovery from grief, of his niece and nephew's antics, of the bustling streets of San Francisco that never truly felt like home. Virginia told him of the ranch's modest successes, of her plans for expansion, of the loneliness that his letters had both eased and intensified. As evening fell, they sat together on the porch, much as they had during Gabriel's convalescence. The familiar ritual felt different now, richer, more meaningful with the knowledge that it wasn't temporary. "I have something for you," Gabriel said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box and held it out to Virginia. "I had this made in San Francisco." With trembling fingers, Virginia opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the last rays of sunset. "Virginia Reynolds," Gabriel said, his voice solemn as he took the ring and held it poised before her finger. "Will you marry me? Will you let me build a life with you here, working this land together, sharing whatever comes, good times and hard ones?" Virginia looked from the ring to Gabriel's face, seeing all her own hopes and dreams reflected in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened again. "Yes, Gabriel Kincaid, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, placing a kiss just above the gold band. "I promise to love you every day of my life," he said softly. "To stand by you through whatever comes." "And I promise the same," Virginia replied, leaning forward to seal their vows with a kiss. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Randsburg. The townspeople, initially surprised by Virginia's engagement to the handsome stranger, turned out in unexpected numbers for the wedding. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps genuine goodwill, but Virginia found she didn't care about their motivations. All that mattered was Gabriel standing beside her, his hand steady and warm around hers as they spoke their vows. Laura and the children had been unable to make the journey from San Francisco, but sent a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift, along with a letter promising a visit in the spring. As fall turned to winter, Gabriel and Virginia settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked side by side during the day, expanding the ranch operations with the capital Gabriel had brought from his years of work. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, always grateful for each other's presence. The townsfolk gradually accepted Gabriel as one of their own, particularly after he helped organize a posse to track down cattle rustlers who had been plaguing the area. His experience as a lawman proved valuable, and soon he was being asked to serve on various town committees. "They're trying to get me to run for sheriff," he told Virginia one evening as they prepared supper together. Virginia paused in her chopping. "Would you want that?" Gabriel considered for a moment. It might be good to have a regular position in town, especially with the ranch doing so well, but only if you're comfortable with it. It would mean more time away from home. "I think you'd make an excellent sheriff," Virginia said thoughtfully. "And it's only 3 miles to town, hardly a great separation." Gabriel smiled, pulling her into a quick embrace. "As long as I come home to you every night, I'd be content." Spring brought new calves, fresh growth in the garden, and to Virginia's surprised delight the news that she was expecting a child of their own. Gabriel's face when she told him was a study in joy and wonder. He lifted her gently, spinning her around the kitchen before setting her carefully back on her feet, mindful of her condition. "A baby," he said in awe, his hand resting reverently on her still flat abdomen. "Our baby." Virginia covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have this: a home, a family, a woman I love more than life itself." "All because of a rattlesnake," Virginia teased, though her own eyes shimmered with joyful tears. Gabriel laughed, drawing her close. "I think I owe that snake a debt of gratitude. If it hadn't been for him, I might have ridden right past your homestead, never knowing what I was missing." "And I might never have said those words," Virginia mused. "What words?" She smiled, remembering the night she had sat beside his fever-racked body, determined not to let death claim him. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, just as she had then. Gabriel's arms tightened around her. "And you never did," he murmured against her hair. "You never did." Laura and the children arrived for a visit just as Virginia's pregnancy began to show. The two women took to each other immediately, finding common ground in their independent spirits and practical approaches to life's challenges. "I can see why you fell in love with her," Laura told Gabriel as they watched Virginia teaching young Eliza how to gather eggs without frightening the hens. "She's remarkable." "She saved more than my life," Gabriel replied quietly. "She saved my soul." Summer passed in a gentle rhythm of ranch work and preparation for the baby. Gabriel was elected sheriff of Randsburg, a position that suited his fair-minded nature and experience. The townspeople who had once whispered about "that Reynolds woman" now spoke with respect of Sheriff and Mrs. Kincaid and their thriving ranch. Their son, James Thomas Kincaid, was born on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Gabriel's return to Virginia. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and both parents agreed he was the most perfect child ever born. "He has your stubbornness," Gabriel teased as Virginia nursed their son in the rocking chair beside the fire. "And your charm," she countered, smiling down at the infant's contented face. "He'll be breaking hearts before he's 10. Gabriel knelt beside the chair, one hand gently stroking his son's downy head. "Thank you," he said softly, looking up at Virginia with all the love in his heart shining in his eyes. "For what? For staying. For not leaving me when you found me half dead in the desert. For loving me. For this perfect boy," Gabriel's voice caught, "for everything." Virginia leaned down to kiss him, their son cradled securely between them. "I told you I wasn't leaving," she whispered against his lips. "And I meant it then. I mean it now. Forever." As winter settled over the desert once more, the Kincaid homestead stood warm and welcoming against the stark landscape. Inside, a family that had been forged in the crucible of crisis thrived in the gentle rhythms of everyday love. Virginia often thought of that fateful day when she had spotted a fallen rider in the distance. How close she had come to missing him entirely. How different her life would have been if she had chosen another path that day, or if Gabriel's fever had claimed him despite her care. But fate, or providence, or simple human compassion had brought them together. 7 nights of vigil had forged a bond that neither time nor distance could break. And now, watching her husband cradle their son before the hearth, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that some loves were simply meant to be, no matter how unlikely their beginnings. "What are you thinking about?" Gabriel asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Virginia smiled, crossing the room to join her family by the fire. "I was thinking that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected places." Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes as he made room for her beside him. "Like a rattlesnake bite." "Like a rattlesnake bite," she agreed, settling against his side, their son sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. Outside, the desert night wrapped around their home like a protective blanket. Stars scattered across the vast sky, bearing silent witness to the enduring power of those simple words spoken in a moment of crisis. Words that had blossomed into a lifetime of love. "I'm not leaving you." And she never did.